Hey guys, so I've been playing a lot of Bannerlord, Mountain Blade lately. What have I got here? I'm on day 2157. So I've been playing for quite a long time. And I've recently been really exploring the blacksmithing uh, features. And I've got to say, there's a lot you can really do with blacksmithing as it is. Currently, I'm playing patch 1.41 right now. But that video that you just saw, with me running down a bunch of footmen, uh, was using the latest axe that I just crafted, which is this one right down here. You can see the statistics on that. It's kind of interesting because it's a tier 6 axe, but it's using a tier 3 head. Initially, I was using some stronger, higher tier, more damaging heads that were working really well. They actually were really great. Nothing wrong with the Bardiache head and some of the tier 5 heads. I'll show you some of the other axes that I was just recently using. So we have this one here. You can see it's got a much higher cut damage. It's got a longer length on it, but what it also has is a much lower handling. Well, not much lower, but 12 points lower, and that actually makes quite a big difference. And that swing speed, which is about 18 points lower, it looks like, that actually makes quite a big difference too. I didn't realize how much of a difference that made, because I was really enjoying this particular axe, and it was working really, really well. And then, but I kind of found it a bit slow too, a bit slow on rearming, a bit slow on re-swinging. And so I thought, I wonder what would happen if I did a little bit of blacksmithing and crafted up a modified version using maybe not the highest tier parts, but finding the numbers that seem to work right for me. So I wanted it to be faster. I wanted it to have better handling. I don't really know exactly how handling works, but I think it probably has something to do with maybe recoil or accuracy. I'm not entirely sure. I'm kind of curious. I'm gonna have to look that up. What I've noticed is that the swing cut damage is not the most important thing. Like 100 damage seems to be plenty enough, especially if you're riding mounted, because you got a bit of momentum behind your swings too. 100 damage would be plenty enough to basically one-shot most things. So having a really high damage wasn't my goal, but rather weapon speed and and handling and again, usually I wanted a lot of reach because especially when you're mounted, it can be hard to get close enough to your enemy to make that hit. But and also a lot of the times you're swinging at footmen on the ground. But I thought maybe there's a better balance of reach and speed and damage, which has a little less reach, a little more speed, a little better handling, and all of that, and how that would work when it all came together. And ultimately, what came together was this axe right here. And I'm going to run the video for you again really quick. I'll run the complete video because I just actually spent some time wrecking ground troops with this particular axe. Okay, and you probably noticed, yeah, just like the swing speed, and if if you don't know, the red indicator flash on the cursor means a kill. So all of those single hits were actually kills with this particular axe, and you saw how quickly it recoiled, how great the handling was, and I found it extremely easy to aim by comparison to the Bardia Shea head, which I had been using previously, and I tried a slightly different variation of it as well. I think I might have given it to a different character, but uh, yeah, just to kind of sum up, when it comes to designing your kind of perfect weapon, playstyle kind of comes into the consideration. Um, if you tend to be attacking ground troops quite a lot, um, maybe maximum length isn't necessarily the most important thing. You might need more swing speed, more handling, more uh, less reach, uh, instead of having like a slower, more. So this, by contrast, is a tier 5 weapon head on a slower but longer reaching axe, and it's more damaging. It has longer range, but I found myself really struggling actually to connect with it. Well, evidence to the contrary here. All right, that is not a good example. So you can really see the recoil speed on this particular axe. It's slower and it kind of doesn't get to where you want it to get to. So then this is the Bardia Shea head, which is again even slower, more damaging, longer reach. But what I often found is that it didn't get to where I wanted it to get to when I wanted it to get there. So that's kind of playstyle, right? Playstyle and timing, of course, but the extra damage and extra reach, I just found it a little bit ungainly to actually use. So, it's the lower tier head, the tier 3 head, with a bit shorter range, bit less damage, but better handling and speed in actual use when you actually come to get to use it in the field. I found worked a whole lot better for me than this particular, you know, quote unquote better variation. So yeah, when you're smithing, and I thought, I've been doing the same with swords and spears. I actually did the exact same thing with a spear recently. I was using a really long spear, like 275, I think, length, and again, the handling diminished. You had all the range you needed, but the handling diminished. The speed diminished. Actually, I think this might be the spear in question, but and what I ended up doing is I shortened the spear down to about 200, and it still had enough reach, pretty much for the most part, to always hit what I was trying to hit, but just the recharge, sort of the reload speed, how many times you could thrust, how quickly you could thrust, uh, combined with like a little bit extra damage actually, because it was a shorter spear. It was for some reason did more damage, and if you weren't moving quite as quickly, you had a sort of better return on your momentum. Yeah, but again, see this particular axe, the timing of it just I had quite a hard time with it, and I used it quite a bit. And I switched over to the faster, more maneuverable version, and just like the very first game, it was a huge difference. So I would highly encourage you to play around. Highly encourage you to play around with all the different speeds and variations of the different types of weapons you can make. And what I kind of tend to do is I'll come to the type of weapon that I'm looking for, and you just take a look at sort of their base stats. and you can get an idea of which one's going to be best for the type of weapon you're trying to make. So some of them will have a higher starting reach, and you can kind of click around and see which one has the highest starting reach. Some of them are swing and thrust, and some of them are just swing. And some of them, depending on which staff you attach, will have the uh, mounted lance conch. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but they'll have the mounted lance sort of option, and that's why you'll see three options. One of them is like that conched position, however that's pronounced, not too sure. But yeah, so what I recently did is I made, yeah, this one here. And so I ended up making it quite a bit shorter, but what I found is that 200 is just about long enough, 66 is great handling, and 88 is great speed for a one-handed pike. I didn't really ever use the conched lance position myself, so I didn't even care about that. I didn't worry about that. But prior to that, I had been using, I think it was this one, much longer, right? So you'd think you'd have an easier time with something that's much longer, but it was slower and it didn't have as good of handling. And when I switched over to this one, I found it just so much easier to hit my mark. And usually the range wasn't a problem because the speed was there and the handling was there. And I'm not sure if this is a tier 5 head or tier 3 or 4 head, but the point is that when you get in there, don't don't always just look to the tier 5 equipment, because the tier 3 and tier 4 stuff can also be potentially better depending on the type of weapon that you're looking to make. Oh, and one other tip on blacksmithing, how to raise your blacksmithing really, really fast. Um, there is a two-handed sword recipe. I believe probably most of these higher tier recipes will work. So you come to two-handed swords, choose one of the tier 5 recipes. Of course, you'll have to unlock those first. Um, crank the size all the way up to the top. Choose basically the hardest hilt that you can find to make, and also the one that uses the least amount of components. Choose the most difficult handle that you can create. I guess it doesn't matter the slider. And you'd probably just want to choose the one that uses the least components here. So you can kind of see which ones that use. These are easy to get. These are less easy. These are less easy. So I would favor -2, -2, -1 over, -2, -2. And you'll get about the same returns as far as skill gains. And of course, the same is true of choosing the most difficult pommel. And again, the same is true of which one uses the least material. So you just choose the hardest one with the most, uh, let's say, cost-efficient material use, and get the difficulty right up there. And it doesn't matter what your difficulty is, because if you're training a character to uh, excel at smithing and they have their learning all the way up, so that you have quite a bit of green. And that's what I also found. If your character doesn't have quite a bit of green on their learning, they'll get to a certain point and then they'll kind of stop. But for example, if you had 32 smithing right now and you tried to smith this weapon with these components and everything, you would probably gain like 30 points in a single smithing attempt. And so if you continue to try to make that particular sword, it doesn't seem to work on most other items, but that two-handed sword, highest tier, highest difficulty, all of that, it seems to allow you to progress through the smithing tree extremely quickly. And then, of course, smelting those high tier weapons also helps you to progress extremely quickly. So I actually just picked up a companion. Where is she? With I gave her 5 focus points and 9 endurance, and I think her learning went up to about here. And then the rest was a bit more of a grind, but it didn't take too long. Yeah, actually it took quite a while, but getting to about here was really quite fast. And it was just through forging that two-handed sword. It doesn't exactly matter, like I say, which which particular blade you use. I think as long as it's one of the tier 5 blades, and then the other components are kind of the max difficulty that you can, your smithing skill will shoot up extremely quickly if you're trained. If your training is green, and otherwise it will go quite a bit slower. So yeah, that's my tips for how to train a smith really quick. And otherwise, look at the weapon stats, not the tier. Look at the weapon stats and try to find, play test it. You got to take your weapon into the field, and figure out, was it too slow? Was it too clunky? Was it, not long enough? Whatever the case may be. And then you make a few minor tweaks, and these minor tweaks actually make a lot more difference than you might think. And that's kind of the point that I've been circling around here. And so that's it, my tips on smithing. And I hope you guys like this video.